Welcome back, Year 5. In today's reading lesson, we're going to continue with Fantastic Mr. Fox and we'll be reading chapters 11 and 12. We're going to follow a model to write a retell of a portion of a longer text. So remember, our focus this week is retelling. What I'm going to do is model how to retell one portion of the text, chapter 11, and then you'll retell chapter 12. Now, just to recap, on Monday, we focused on identifying the main events in a text, in a portion of a text, and then putting them in order using transition words. And we used a graphic organizer a lot like this. When you're sequencing events, it's very useful to have a list of transition words to draw from. So here are some examples that you might choose to use today. One that I would really like to draw your attention to is in the middle of the second column. It says, meanwhile. Now, I know some of you have used that word before, but do you know what it really means? When you say meanwhile, it means something is happening at the same time as something else. I'm going to show you how to use that word today. But first, let's read chapter 11. It's called A Surprise for Mrs. Fox. The small fox ran back along the tunnel as fast as he could, carrying the 3 plump hens. He was exploding with joy. Just wait, he kept thinking. Just wait till Mummy sees these. He had a long way to run, but he never stopped once on the way, and he came bursting in upon Mrs. Fox. "Mummy!" he cried, out of breath. "Look, Mummy, look! Wake up and see what I've brought you." Mrs. Fox, who was weaker than ever now from lack of food, opened one eye and looked at the hens. "I'm dreaming," she murmured, and closed the eye again. "You're not dreaming, Mummy. They're real chickens. We're saved. We're not going to starve." Mrs. Fox opened both eyes and sat up quickly. "But, my dear child," she cried, "where on earth—" "Boggis's chicken house number 1, spluttered the small fox. "We tunneled right up under the floor, and you've never seen so many big fat hens in all your life. And Dad said to prepare a feast. They'll be back soon." The sight of food seemed to give new strength to Mrs. Fox. "A feast it shall be," she said, standing up. "Oh, what a fantastic fox your father is. Hurry up, child, and start plucking those chickens." Far away down in the tunnel, the fantastic Mr. Fox was saying, "Now for the next bit, my darlings. This one'll be easy as pie. All we have to do is dig another little tunnel from here to there." "To where, Dad?" "Don't ask so many questions. Start digging." That takes us to the end of chapter 11. What I want to do now is show you how I would retell that chapter. Now keep in mind, this was a very short chapter. It was only 2 pages. Whereas some other chapters in this book are 6 or 7 pages long. So my retell for this chapter is particularly short. This is what I said. Retell of Mrs. Fox Gets a Surprise. At the start of the chapter, one of the small foxes returns home with the chickens from Boggis's chicken house. At first, Mrs. Fox thinks she is dreaming, but she is soon amazed to discover it is real. She and the small fox begin to prepare the feast like Mr. Fox asked. Meanwhile, Mr. Fox and the other foxes start digging another tunnel. So as you can see, my focus was just the big things that happened in that chapter, and I used my transition words and phrases to help move my retell along. At the end, you'll see where I used meanwhile. I used it in that case because it means at the same time that Mrs. Fox and the small fox were preparing the feast, Mr. Fox and the other foxes were digging a tunnel. So they were doing those 2 actions at the same time. That's what meanwhile means. Now I've highlighted with little numbers all of the events that I picked out to include in my retell. If you count real quickly, you'll see that I picked 5 events from this chapter. First, I picked that the small fox returns home. Then I picked that Mrs. Fox thought she was dreaming, but then discovered it was real, so that's 2 events there. Then I used that they started to prepare a feast, and that Mr. Fox started digging the tunnel with the other small foxes. So those were the biggest things that happened. I tried not to focus too much on smaller events that took place in the chapter. Now let's read chapter 12. This is the chapter that you will be retelling. Badger. Mr. Fox and the 3 remaining small foxes dug fast and straight. They were all too excited now to feel tired or hungry. They knew they were going to have a whacking great feast before long, and the fact that it was none other than Boggis's chickens they were going to eat made them churgle with laughter every time they thought of it. It was lovely to realize that while the fat farmer was sitting up there on the hill waiting for them to starve, he was also giving them their dinner without knowing it. "Keep digging," said Mr. Fox. "It's not much further." All of a sudden, a deep voice above their heads said, "Who goes there?" The foxes jumped. They looked up quickly and they saw, peeking through a small hole in the roof of the tunnel, a long black pointed furry face. "Badger!" cried Mr. Fox. "Foxy!" cried Badger. "My goodness me, I'm glad I found someone at last. I've been digging around in circles for 3 days and nights and I haven't the foggiest idea where I am." Badger made the hole in the ceiling bigger and dropped down beside the foxes. A small badger, his son, dropped down after him. "Haven't you heard what's happening up on the hill?" Badger said excitedly. "It's chaos. Half the wood has disappeared, and there are men with guns all over the countryside. None of us can get out, even at night. We're all starving to death." "Who is we?" asked Mr. Fox. "All us diggers. That's me and Mole and Rabbit and all our wives and children. Even Weasel, who can usually sneak out of the tightest spots, is right now hiding down my hole with Mrs. Weasel and 6 kids. What on earth are we going to do, Foxy? I think we're finished." Mr. Fox looked at his 3 children and he smiled. The children smiled back at him, sharing his secret. "My dear old Badger," he said, "this mess you're in is all my fault." "I know it's your fault," said Badger furiously. "And the farmers are not going to give up till they've got you. Unfortunately, that means us as well. It means everyone on the hill." Badger sat down and put a paw around his small son. "We're done for," he said softly. "My poor wife up there is so weak she can't dig another yard." "Nor can mine," said Mr. Fox. "And yet, at this very minute, she is preparing for me and my children the most delicious feast of plump, juicy chickens." "Stop!" cried Badger. "Don't tease me, I can't stand it." "It's true!" cried the small foxes. "Dad's not teasing. We've got chickens galore." "And because everything is entirely my fault," said Mr. Fox, "I invite you to share the feast. I invite everyone to share it. You and Mole and Rabbit and Weasel and all your wives and children. There'll be plenty to go around, I can assure you." "You mean it?" cried Badger. "You really mean it?" Mr. Fox pushed his face close to Badger's and whispered, darkly, "Do you know where we've just been?" "Where?" "Right inside Boggis's chicken house #1. "No!" "Yes, but that is nothing to where we are going now. You have come just at the right moment, my dear Badger. You can help us dig. And in the meanwhile, your small son can run back to Mrs. Badger and all the others and spread the good news." Mr. Fox turned to the small badger and said, "Tell them they are invited to a fox's feast. Then bring them all down here and follow this tunnel back until you find my home." "Yes, Mr. Fox," said the small badger. "Yes, sir, right away, sir. Oh, thank you, sir." And he scrambled quickly back through the hole in the roof of the tunnel and disappeared. That takes us to the end of chapter 12, called Badger. And guess what? Your job is to retell this chapter in just 1 paragraph. Let me show you your instructions. Write a paragraph retelling Badger, chapter 12 of Fantastic Mr. Fox. Here are the key things you need to do. Focus on the main events. Avoid retelling minor details. Use transition words and phrases. I recommend that you go back to the example that I showed you before to get an idea of how you can structure your retell. You don't want it to be too long, but at the same time you don't want to miss out important events. So make sure you capture what's most important. If you need to, listen to the chapter one more time and think to yourself, what are the most important things that happened in this chapter? If I was going to tell my mom or dad what happened in this part of the story, what parts would I include? When you're all done, don't forget to take a picture and send it to me. As always, stay safe and I'll see you soon.